Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving into what is, honestly, one of the most incredible cases of historical whiplash ever recorded. We're going to examine the story of how Japan evolved from a completely locked-down feudal state into the modern global powerhouse we all recognize today. Because, when you think of Japan right now, you probably picture bustling, technologically advanced cities, an incredibly open culture, and a huge global hub for tourism and trade. But getting there? Well, that required one of the most turbulent, rapid, and extreme transformations in human history.
Just picture this massive contrast for a second. On one side, you have a 17th century Japan where the borders were firmly, and I mean absolutely firmly closed to any outside visitors whatsoever. Then, on the flip side, you have modern Japan, one of the most highly developed, tech-forward, and remarkably open nations on Earth. The peaceful tech giant we know today didn't just slowly, naturally evolve over time. It's actually the direct result of a dramatic and sometimes pretty violent historical whiplash.
Part 1. The Closed Society. 200-plus years of peace. So, back in the 17th century, a leader named Tokugawa Ieyasu finally established central control over a Japan that had previously been chaotic, fractured, and totally war-torn. And to keep that hard-won peace, they took some extremely drastic measures. The crucial point here is a policy called Sakoku. To maintain stability, stop social unrest, and completely stamp out foreign influence, specifically European Christianity, which was really spreading at the time, the third Tokugawa, Ieyasu, introduced this policy in 1639. Sakoku effectively turned the entire island nation into a lockdown, isolated fortress.
Now, you might be wondering, did an extreme lockdown like that actually work? Well, yeah. For exactly 268 uninterrupted years, Japan experienced profound peace and stability under the Tokugawa shogunate. Think about that. That is nearly 3 centuries without a single major war or foreign invasion.
The rules during this total lockdown were absolute. No Japanese citizen could travel abroad, and honestly, if they were already overseas, they were forbidden to return. They literally banned the construction of ocean-going vessels. No way to leave, no way to come back. Trade was restricted almost entirely to a tiny handful of Dutch merchants who were strictly confined to a single, small, artificial island called Dejima. And yet, despite being completely cut off from the rest of the planet, Japanese culture and their domestic economy actually flourished. The government built new roads and schools, and a booming population practically doubled to about 30 million people.
Which leaves us with a huge question, right? If Sakoku was so successful at bringing peace and domestic growth, how on earth did this island nation undergo such a massive transition to a global superpower? It's kind of hard to imagine such a peaceful, closed-off society surviving forever in a rapidly industrializing world. And that leads us directly to the ultimate inciting incident. Part 2. The doors forced open. The arrival of the West.
Fast forward to the mid-19th century, and cracks were definitely beginning to show in the shogunate's armor, mostly due to stagnating agriculture and some really devastating famines in the 1830s. And this internal weakness happened right as Western powers started aggressively knocking on the door. In 1853, Japan's cozy period of isolation came to a sudden, terrifying halt. A fleet of heavily armed American warships, led by Commodore Matthew Perry, sailed straight into Edo Day. The U.S. government wanted Japan's ports open to international trade, and they were entirely prepared to use military force to make it happen. Unable to match the sheer, superior firepower of Commodore Perry's fleet, the shogunate reluctantly capitulated. Just like that, centuries of isolation were shattered, essentially overnight.
Part 3. Rapid industrialization, the Meiji Restoration. Now, this capitulation to America absolutely infuriated many inside Japan, especially in the powerful southern provinces of Choshu and Satsuma. In 1868, they outright overthrew the shogunate, restoring supreme power to the young Emperor Meiji, which marked an immediate and drastic pivot. Going from an isolationist era where you literally couldn't build an ocean-going vessel to a period of rapid, breakneck industrialization, it is the definition of historical whiplash. The new Meiji government immediately prioritized modernizing their infrastructure, with railways and telegraphs. They established a universal education system. They even brought in hundreds of Western advisors in mining, banking, and law to teach them everything they knew. They basically decided that if they were going to survive in this new modern world, they had to entirely reinvent the nation to rival the Western powers.
But, as you can imagine, when modernization happens at that incredibly fast pace, it leaves a lot of people behind.
The government massively updated their military with Western tactics and modern technologies. And because of this, the traditional samurai warriors, who had been the absolute elite fighting force in Japan for centuries, suddenly found themselves totally obsolete. This friction actually sparked the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, where a newly modernized standing army easily crushed the remnants of the old samurai class. The transformation was complete.
Part 4. Ambition and Ruin, the Empire Expands. Armed with this newly modernized military might, Japan quickly decided to replicate the colonial empires of the very Western powers they had just learned from. And the speed of their expansion was staggering. In 1894, their highly motivated forces defeated King China. By 1902, they're forming formal alliances with global superpowers like Britain. Then came the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. Japan virtually annihilated the Russian Navy, making them the first Asian power in decades to defeat a major Western power. By 1910, they had officially annexed Korea. In just a few short decades, they had morphed from a completely closed-off island into the predominant Asian power on the world stage. But that unchecked military ambition, it began to seriously spiral. Moving into the 1930s, growing fascist and extreme nationalist sentiment took hold, particularly within the military ranks. Their expansionist ambitions in the Asia-Pacific region eventually led to harsh economic sanctions from the United States. And in response, Japan aligned itself geopolitically with the Axis powers, Germany and Italy, and made the fateful decision to preemptively strike the American fleet at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941.
Of course, that attack triggered a fierce and prolonged conflict across the Pacific against the Allies. It was a completely brutal war that ultimately ended in total, catastrophic devastation for Japan. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, resulting in well over 100,000 deaths and compelling Japan's unconditional surrender. Their imperial ambitions had literally left the nation in ruins.
Part 5. The Economic Miracle. Rebuilding a Modern Nation.
With the empire utterly destroyed, Japan was placed under Allied occupation led by American General Douglas MacArthur, and once again, the country was forced into another massive existential pivot. This post-war reconstruction essentially hit the reset button on the entire nation. Step 1, the military was totally disarmed. Step 2, the government was democratized. Step 3, Emperor Hirohito was actually required to publicly disavow his divine status, which completely dismantled the state Shinto religious system. And finally, Step 4, under the guidance of Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida, Japan shifted its focus completely away from an assertive foreign policy and entirely toward economic development.
And the results of that laser focus? Honestly, they were staggering. By 1955, just 10 years after the end of World War II, the Japanese economy had already surpassed its pre-war levels. And by 1968, Japan had somehow emerged as the world's second-largest capitalist economy. It's often referred to as an absolute economic miracle.
They quickly established themselves as a global leader in automobile manufacturing and became a massive player in the electronics industry. Fast forward to today, and they rank near the absolute top globally in economics, technological advancement, and life expectancy. They achieved all of this through the incredibly arduous work ethic and the sheer tenacity of a people who had suffered the world's most destructive conflict, consciously choosing to build a brand new society entirely free from the hostilities of their past. So, looking back at this entire journey leaves us with a really fascinating, provocative thought. Would Japan be the open, tech-forward superpower it is today if it hadn't been forced through the extreme whiplash of total isolation, followed by incredibly rapid industrialization and then devastating ruin? Is the modern Japan we marvel at today a direct, unavoidable reaction to the intense pressures of its own turbulent history? It is a wild question to think about, and it's exactly what makes understanding the history of this incredible nation so absolutely vital. Thanks for exploring this with me today.